maybe I am not as enthusiastic as I should be. And since ultimately I can only really control myself anyway, not only is this an effective strategy, it's the only strategy that's within my capacity. I can, and I use this term a little harshly, blame Hashem for not inspiring me enough, but I can't really do anything about that. What I can do about, what I can do something about is my perspective, or as we like to say, my attitude. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about this thing called humility. And it's a very different idea in Torah and Hasidus than it is in the sort of secular idea, because it's a Kedusha concept. It's not a secular concept, but we're discussing. So here we go. Perek Lamed. Oid Zois, another thing. So here Alter Rebbe not only alludes to it, like we often point out, when the first letter of a chapter is the letter Vav, which means and, here it's much more expressly, Oid, additionally. This we, Yosim El Liboy, to take to heart. Now, again, every word, of course, is precise. And as we've talked so much about, the heart is the home field advantage, although not the exclusive domain, but it is more aligned with our animalistic, and we say animalistic, we don't mean that's to be violent, it means anything that's about what's in it for meism. The heart is the seat of it, just like the heart reacts. A person becomes scared, their heart beats faster. So too, the animal, you dangle the little magic beans in front of him and he becomes more and more enthusiastic. He gets all excited. He sees the custard donut and he goes nuts. So when the Alter Rebbe says, take this to heart, that's where we're focused on. Remember, ever since chapter about 18, we started to speak in the more direct strategy of the short, long way. Remember, of course, the Alter Rebbe's recommendation is that we engage the intellect to master our thoughts and thus change our emotions. The Alter Rebbe here is pointing out how we can directly address and again, we call it emotional, but we don't mean that in the sense because emotions can be positive, but that impulsive, that's probably the better word, that reactive, like the heart. I see it, I get excited. It's reactive as opposed to being strategic. So we should take to heart, because that's where the problem is. The person is experiencing timtum, a clenching of the heart, or a clogging of the heart. L'kayim Maimer Razal, to fulfill the statement of our sages, the heavy shafel ruach b'fnei kol ha'adam, be of lowly spirit before all of the people. Now, two important points. The common phrase, if you look it up sort of in the dictionary, for humility in Hebrew is anivus. Someone is an anav. An anav, the root of that word is the word for impoverished. In fact, as an example, the word for a simple poor man is an ani. He's in need. In fact, there is no statement in Torah that says thou shalt fast on Yom Kippur. Rather, it says ta'anu, which is the same root word here, diminish or deny or something like that, your soul. And we learn from there the different things that we are prohibited from doing on Yom Kippur, eating, drinking, showering, etc. So the concept of anivis is to empty out. This is a more profound statement. Shafel ruach means of lowly spirit. Now, again, in English, all these things sound harsh and critical and a little nasty, frankly. But remember, when we are in a value system that holds nothingness to be the most profound, Hashem is not a thing, right? Yesh mi ayin, something from nothing. So to be nothing is truly to have achieved the loftiest objective. I know it feels like, George Orwell doublespeak here, but it's important that we understand the meaning of the terms as the Torah teaches them and as the Alter Rebbe is emphasizing them. So when I say that I feel humble, it's not about feeling less valuable. It's about feeling total bittul, a total nonsense of self. Because where is Hashem? Wherever I let him in. Where is he not let in? Wherever I'm crowding him out. And if we've ever had the experience of being around people who don't allow other people to have identity, and again, I don't mean that they're, God forbid, killing them or not permitting them in the room, but they only, they sort of suck up all the air in the room. They take up all of that space. Then we understand this idea that Hashem is only where we allow him to be. But if we are consumed with self, then we are not allowing of Hashem to be in that space. So again, I think we get the concept. Now, it's curious that in the Mishnah, and over the generations, due to everything from typos to just different understandings, we have some variations on some spellings of words and so on. And there's a crucial one that the Alter Rebbe has made a definitive decision in quoting from this statement. This statement is a Mishnah, and there's two forms of this Mishnah. What is called, the term is a Girsa. And these are different traditions, not right, wrong. One reads, Hevi Shafal Ruach Bifnei Kol Adam, and the other, the way the Alter Rebbe has it, has the hey prefix before the final word. You look here in the, well, at least in the original print, I'm sure in the lesson of Tanya and so on, it's ha-adam with the hey, the man. Now, there's an important difference between them. If it read, be of humble spirit, lowly spirit, and again, in the English words are not going to capture it because it's not a concept that exists in the same context in a secular view as it does in a Torah view. In a Torah view, we consider being of lowly spirit the most virtuous thing. In a sort of secular view, we say, oh, you're lowly, it's sort of immoral, and we consider it to be moral. I mean, you see where the upside downness comes, but I think we understand the idea. Now, one way of reading it is, be humble before each person, call Adam, each person. That means you see this guy, you see that guy. The Alter Rebbe chooses the more all-inclusive. Ha-Adam, we might translate as humanity, the species humanity, not just this guy and this guy and this guy. Yes, I can always find something. I can run faster than that guy, but he can speak Spanish, or I can do math better than this guy, but he is kinder than I am. It's not just about some specific thing that I should be looking at about this person. It's rather the overarching concept that I am surrendered to all of humanity. Not because this guy has something and that guy has something, but because, again, when I'm feeling a distance from Hashem, and again, that's the overarching goal. I feel a distance from Hashem. If I would recognize that I have my own flaws, this would help me recognize why I am feeling so distant from Hashem. I guess a little bit or a lot of it of our sense of distance is born of a presumption that I shouldn't feel so distant from God. Doesn't everybody know? Doesn't Hashem know how great I am? I mean, I'm doing everything right. And again, maybe it's conceptual, but maybe you've had this experience and people will say things like, you know me, I'm a patient person. So if I get impatient, it's really that someone's done something bad. Well, not necessarily. Maybe you're not so patient. We presume ourselves to be more patient than we are. Not us, other people. We tend to overestimate ourselves. I'm more thoughtful than other people. I'm more kind than other people. I'm more forgiving than other people. I'm more tolerant than other people. So when we get upset, we presume that since I am a kind, tolerant, patient person, if I got upset, that is proof positive that the other person has done something so horrific that it even upset me. Well, maybe we need to get over ourselves a little bit and say, you know what, maybe I'm not so patient, tolerant, kind, and accepting. And that's why I get so upset, not because of the other guy. And it's really, this blaming thing. And that's kind of the message that the Alter Rebbe is going for. And a strategy to achieve this degree of tolerance is an awareness of humility before all people. and not to think of myself as distinctive in that area. We seem to have evidence that supports that. Isn't it true that sometimes it is the other guy's fault? Or in this context, isn't it true that I deserve better? But we'll see. So the Alter Rebbe doubles down on this statement, and he says, it's not only about not behaving in a manner of arrogance, it is genuinely about achieving this awareness. And again, we're ultimately shooting for our relationship with Hashem. And here the Alter Rebbe is recommending as a strategy, if we will have humility before all people, we will genuinely be able to have this type of closeness with Hashem. Now we find a curious point, not only in Hasidus, but in Halacha as well. In the Rambam's book of character traits, his laws of character traits. So he generally advises what he calls the middle path. A person shouldn't be stingy with their money. They shouldn't be frivolous with their money. A person shouldn't starve themselves. They shouldn't overeat. They should take the medium path. That's his general recommendation, with one exception, and that is humility. The Rambam advises, so again, here we're talking about in his book of Halacha, it happens to be the Rambam's Yurtzeit tomorrow. The Rambam advises that a person be exceedingly humble. This Mishnah, Havishafal Ruach, be very humble. Why can't a person be, shouldn't be super arrogant, Hollywood celebrity, but he shouldn't be so self-disparaging. Why can't we advise the middle path as he does for how a person handles their other material behaviors, their money and their food and so on and so forth? And the answer is because that nothingness is what subsumes us within the infinity of Hashem. And again, I know maybe it's me, I'm projecting out that in our human perspective, we like to be something. I don't like to be thought of as nothing. But on the other thing, I don't want to be thought of as a thing, as we've talked about so many times. Now, the Alter Rebbe says it should be emes la'amitoy. This is a phrase we have used before. Truth to truth. Truth to truth means it's true through and through. Because for a person, I know it sounds funny, to act humbly is kind of arrogant. I know, meaning, it's like, oh, I'm so humble. Did I tell you how humble I am? And so on. That is, I'm too consumed with self, my presumption of myself or my presentation of myself. Again, we're not here to study comparative cultures and so on, but I will share this one thought. I once visited an Amish town, and I'm not beating up on the Amish here, and they talk a lot about humility. It's a very powerful value in their community. So they say, you shouldn't be the first one up and out at work in the morning, because it's like arrogant. So what do? They get up and they wait and they look out the window until they see someone else. Then they're the second one. Now, again, I'm not here to beat up on them, but that's not what we mean in terms, because it's the same thing. I'm making sure to be humble. Again, I know it sounds like a word game, but it's not our idea. There, I'm also concerned with self. The ultimate arrogance is the concern with self. Like the Alter Rebbe recommends in the introduction to Tanya, don't have a false sense of humility where who am I to help people? Again, it's too much of self. Oh, I don't want to help the person. I'll feel too proud of myself. Meanwhile, the person needs help. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe says that it should be emes la'amitoy, not just not acting haughty, but it should genuinely penetrate the very essence of my existence. Okay. V'hainu, this means alpi ma'amer razal. How can? Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a line there. Afilu b'fnei kal shebakalim. Even before the kal shebakalim, we talked about this before. Kal shebakalim means the lightest of the light. That's literally what it means. And the idea is the person who's most easily dissuaded from the path of Hashem. Even before that person who has no fortitude, has no ethical endurance. I should be humble before him. Now, how can I actually be humble before him? I mean, really? I should be humble before that person? So the Alter Rebbe continues with another quote from a Mishnah that gives us a strategy for how we can, in fact, achieve such a level. Behindu al pi maimarazal, and the mechanism to achieving this objective is based on the statement of our sages. Quote, Al todin es chavercha ad shetagia lemkoima. Excuse me. It reads like this. Do not judge your friend, that's an important term, or the one you are bound with, literally, until you have reached his place. This is like the old joke, or the old wise saying, do not judge a man until you have walked a mile in his shoes, because then you'll be a mile away and you'll have his shoes, so he won't be able to chase you. But the concept being not just, do not judge the person, do not judge your friend until you've reached this place. So two crucial points. One is you first has to be your friend. And we talk about this in halacha as well, and certainly strategically, about rebuking. In Torah, it tells us, rebuke, you shall rebuke your countrymen. Just like, God forbid, if you saw someone drop their wallet or walk in the middle of traffic, you wouldn't say, hey, I'm not going to get involved. You'd say, excuse me, you dropped your wallet. Or, hey, careful, you're going to get hit by a car. So too, if I see a Jewish person who doesn't know that they're supposed to shake the lulav and esrog or eat matzah, so it would be cruel for me. Just like if I saw the guy drop his wallet, I wouldn't say, well, I don't want to get involved. Well, maybe he doesn't care about his wallet. I presume that nobody wants to lose their wallet, and he didn't realize that he dropped his wallet. So I pointed out to him. So too, every Jew wants to shake the lulav and esrog. He just doesn't know, just like he didn't know he dropped his wallet. So I say, excuse me, you may not realize you dropped your wallet. Excuse me, you may not realize today is Sukkot, and you want to shake the lulav and esrog. Or you don't see the car coming. I don't say, who am I to judge? If a guy wants to walk out in the middle of traffic, I don't say, he doesn't realize it. So you may not realize that this is going on. So I say in the most polite way, et cetera, et cetera. But again, there is an obligation that I have to, quote, rebuke the person. And again, rebuke sounds harsh, but to point out to the person what they may not know themselves. So the first thing is I have to realize that I am bound with him. I don't say there's no such thing as none of my business. We are bound up together. We are linked. We are unified, whatever the phrase is. That's one. So don't judge him, your friend, until you reach his place. Now, reach his place is what the Alter Rebbe is going to point out. Now, again, we know that it's very socially unacceptable to judge people, but we have to make judgments. I mean, we make judgments about people all the time. We have to protect ourselves and so on. But here, the Alter Rebbe is recommending, how we can assess the circumstance. And that is when we reach his place. And again, unlike, walk the mile in his shoes, my silly joke aside, there's a distinctive particularism that the Alter Rebbe is emphasizing here. Ki mekoimoi, his place, goyrem loy lichtoya, is what is causing him to sin. So when I see that person, I say, well, he's so far away from Hashem. Look at all the bad things he does. And then again, in our context here is not just about our interpersonal reaction and interactions, but also about myself. So I say, I don't do what the bad things that this person does. And therefore, again, what's relevant to our chapter, I should feel closer to Hashem. How come I feel so distant from Hashem? Look what a good person I am. And what's my evidence of my good personism? That I'm not like that guy. That guy does all these bad things. Now, what's the response? How can I see this guy and not see his bad things, but on the contrary, see that he's close to Hashem, even though he may be doing these bad things? Because what's causing him to do these bad things, which again, the reflection is, what's causing me to do the good things, It's not him and it's not me. It's the circumstance. So the Alter Rebbe explains, I'm going to read the line, then we'll come back. His place is what causes him to sin. That his parnasa requires him to travel in the marketplace all the Duda day. And to be from those who sit on the corners, sitting on the corners. I mean, I don't know we use that term anymore, but it sort of suggested like, bums, hanging around, sitting on the corner, kind of doing nothing. That it's like a colloquialism. Ve'enav, and his eyes, royas kolatai, he sees all of the different enticements. He's working there in front of all of the fancy shops. Va'ayin royav alev chaymet, v'yitzray boyer ketano boyer mu'ufa. And what happens? It's a sort of a cause effect. A person's eyes see, their heart gets fired up, and their Yetzer Hara is fired up like a furnace. Like it says in the Pasuk, he's as fired up as a furnace. Now, we have an example that happens to be the chitas of these couple of days, right from the very beginning of Tanya. You may recall that the opening chapter, literally the first page of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe quoted the story about Rabbi. Rabbi is one of our greatest sages. In fact, Rabbi is not his name. It means great sage. So he had that title. And when he was teaching his students about what a Beinoni is, he included himself, or he pointed to himself. He said, someone like me is a Beinoni. And this isn't just being humble, because his colleague, who was called Abaye, that wasn't his name. It's actually an acronym for a verse, because he was an orphan, and it stands for something to do with how God comforts the orphans, which I forget. But anyway, Abaye has a reaction. And he says, if you are only like a Beinoni, then the rest of us are, we have no chance. So clearly he took Rabba as being literal. And the Alter Rebbe asked the question, again, we take Rabba as meaning what he said and not just throwing around, the silly talk. How could Rabba think that he's a Beinoni? We know that he never paused for a moment from Torah study, so much so that the angel of death could never touch him. So what do you mean he's a Beinoni? I mean, who are you kidding? Again, it's not just some sort of false humility and so on. We're taking this seriously. So in chapter 12 or 13, it's today's Chitas, the Alter Rebbe explains that Rabbi said, look, I live in the yeshiva. All I do all day is study Torah. I am constantly and exclusively, that's the more important word, surrounded by holiness. So of course, everything I do is holy. But, and you may recall the phrase, itim mizumanim, those special times, when even if a person still has a Yetzer Hara, but it's Yom Kippur, he's davening, it's Shabbos, whatever it is, he gets such a boost that his Yetzer Hara runs away. The Gemara tells us that even a simple person won't lie on Shabbos because his Yetzer Hara is like, okay, forget it, I know. And the Yetzer Hara keeps waiting, okay. Well, if a person's like Rabba, and he's constantly studying Torah, literally never pauses for a moment, so his Yetzer Hara just never has a place to sit down. Remember, we used the musical chairs analogy. He's eligible, he just doesn't find a spot. So that's why Rabbi said, look, I don't know. If I went out into the big bad world, I don't know what would happen to me. So maybe I'm only like a Beinoni who is experiencing life like a tzaddik, not because I am a tzaddik, but because I am, again, exclusively surrounded by holiness. Well, on the flip side, somebody who doesn't have that opportunity, who has to be exposed to all the crassness in the world. And again, if anyone's ever had the experience, it's the old story. If you go into the perfume shop, you wind up smelling like perfume. So if you go into a place where everybody is lowly and crass and self-serving, America, it starts to rub off on you. Even if you defend it and you sort of back it up and you keep it away from you and so on. I mean, it's just the nature of it. And the person is constantly seeing all of this temptation. It's surrounding them and bombarding them all the time. And like a reflex. A person sees it, they want it, and their Yetzer Hara is constantly being stimulated. And they're lucky if they can find an hour in the morning to daven and an hour in the evening to study Torah and Shabbos and so on. There is a story, I even think it's a true story, that when the second Rebbe was an adult, is still though in the lifetime of the Alter Rebbe. So he, being the Rebbe's son and the sort of groomed to be the successor, he, took on already a certain role of being a mashpia in the community. So there was this one man, and the guy would come to daven in the morning, but he always had to skedaddle out early, and he didn't stay for the end of davening, and he didn't stay for the learning, and so the story goes, his name was Reb Dover, he wasn't yet the Rebbe. He rebuked him. We sort of told him, what's with this? Why aren't you staying to the end of davening? And why don't you stay for the learning afterwards? What are you running out for? So the man said to him, like in a bit of a harsh way, he says, what do you know? I do business with all of these peasants, and I have to get there first thing in the morning. And then I got to sit with them, and I got to listen to them talk, and I got to listen to their crass manner, and they wanted to have a drink with me. But if I don't sit with them, they're not going to pay me. And this is what I got to do. So the earlier I can get there, the more likely it is that I'm going to be able to avoid having to deal with it. And what do you know? You sit here all day, your father's the Rebbe, and you sit here studying Torah. So as the story goes, the next day, the Alter Rebbe summons this guy into his office. The guy's, I'm in trouble now. And the Alter Rebbe says, thank you for making my son into a chassid. Because he doesn't understand. Sure, the rabbi says, why did you do that? Yeah, you're the rabbi. You sit all day in the yeshiva. Everyone, expects you to be all holy and everything. So quite literally, it's easier for you. And the people out there, in that crass, nasty world, not only, and again, we're talking about people who are doing Torah and mitzvahs and so on, but they're surrounded by it. It's just the nature of it, that when a person is surrounded, again, now the Alter Rebbe is going to say, now it's not an excuse. They don't get to say, well, therefore I get to do it because I'm surrounded by it. We have a halacha, it's kind of a curious halacha, that a Jew is not permitted to work in a non-kosher restaurant. Why not? So there's basically two reasons. One is because we're afraid that he'll absentmindedly eat something. Or the other is that he will give the impression that it's kosher. Well, Yankel works there, it must be kosher. So a similar idea. I mean, if we're surrounded, and I'm not saying, again, we're not talking about just working in the restaurant, but anybody who doesn't have the opportunity to spend all of his waking hours in the yeshiva or in the place of holiness is inevitably going to be, I'll use this word, affected, not necessarily tainted, but affected by it. So when I see this guy and I say, well, how come he's close to Hashem? I'm ahead of him, and how come I don't feel close to Hashem or close enough to Hashem? Well, you don't know what he's going through, and each person at their own level. So again, it's not so much about the other guy, it's really about me and how it comes back to me. Each person has their test. Masha'ain came, which is not the case. And again, like Rabbi, here we're on the flip side, which is the most extreme on the other side, who's surrounded exclusively by holiness. Mi shahelech b'shuk ma'at, a person who is in the marketplace very little, v'roif hayoyin yeshiv b'beisai, and spends most of his day in his home or in the place of holiness. V'gam im hoylech kol hayoyin b'shuk, even if he does go all day to work. He says, what do you mean? I work in the same job as that guy. I have the same exposures that he has. Don't tell me that he's got it harder than me. And maybe it's even true. He's got it just as hard as me. Yacholi, yes, it could be. That's it. It doesn't affect him. He happens to have a certain personality that he's not so interested in material things. They're not so exciting to him. He's not interested in wealth and fancy things. Not everybody's Yetzer Hara is the same. This guy's Yetzer Hara is this way, this guy's Yetzer Hara is that way. It's different. So when people say, maybe you've heard people say this, don't tell me you can't do it because I did it. So people say, don't tell me that people can't XYZ because I did XYZ. So I always say to them, right, you're not special, right? What you do, anybody can do. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's like saying, don't tell me people can't play the piano. I play the piano. Don't tell me people can't learn to speak Spanish. I speak, right, that's your distinctive gift. The fact that you can do it doesn't mean that everybody can do it. It means that you have a certain special gift. So it sounds like I'm being very humble, but I'm not, because all I'm using is demanding. So you can do this. Why can't you do that? Oh, that's too hard. But that guy can do it. Well, he's right. Each person has their own challenges. So what I can do doesn't mean everybody else can do it. And if someone else can do it, I should do it. And again, it's not an excuse. We have, you may recognize in Pirkei Avos again, we say, Ezehu Gibor, who is mighty, one who conquers his Yetzer Hara. The phrase is Hakoive, she conquers es Yitzroi, his Yetzer Hara. So we point out, it doesn't say who is mighty, one who conquers the Yetzer Hara. It's who is mighty is one who conquers his Yetzer Hara. Your Yetzer Hara is very easy for me to conquer because I don't have any pleasure in the other person's indulgence. So it's very easy for me to say that person shouldn't indulge in that thing. But that's not my mission. My mission is to deal with my Yetzer Hara. So again, not only here is the Alter Rebbe teaching us about interpersonal reaction with other people, he's teaching us about understanding our true character and thus understanding our relationship with Hashem. So when I look at the other person, I have the impulse to say, well, I should be ahead of that guy. Why should I be ahead of that guy? Well, look what he does. Yeah, but you don't know his whole backstory. I don't know why it is that he has that. And say, well, I have the same experience and I don't do that. Yeah, that's not your Yetzer Hara. You're not interested in those things. Those things are not meaningful to you. So the fact that I don't XYZ doesn't mean that I have, quote, achieved anything of greater value. And therefore, again, it's not about competing with the other guy. It shouldn't be so stunning why I am not feeling so close to Hashem, because ultimately what's keeping me away from Hashem is myself. I get in my own way from feeling close with Hashem. So last chapter we said, stop blaming God, stop blaming why I'm not inspired. And this chapter we're saying, start looking at yourself. Now, the Alter Rebbe sort of interjects here because he knows where the Yetzer Hara is going. The Yetzer Hara is going, right. See, I have the worst Yetzer Hara. I have the most difficult circumstance, and therefore it's not so bad that I do it because, my life forces me to be involved in all of this kind of mishagas, and I am forced to be exposed to all kinds of temptation, and I have a very fiery Yetzer Hara, which all could be absolutely true, but still, that's not an excuse. The Alter Rebbe points out here with the period and whoa, Be'emes, the truth is, even the person who is naturally a very passionate person and likes stuff, and that's his nature, and it's not because he did anything wrong. That's how he's made. He's made that he really likes all this, material stuff. Uparnasasa, and his only way of making a parnasa, is to be the guy who sits on the corners. Again, that's a euphemism for, he has to hang out with a bummy crowd. That's crass and lowly and foul-mouthed and so on. Don't think that therefore, I'm entitled. It's not so bad for me. I could do that. It's a curious point. One of the classic teachings of the Baal Shem Tov is that everybody can be close with Hashem, even if you're not a scholar. Even if you're not learned, you can still be close with Hashem, the simple Jew and so on. So when this message was sort of being promoted by the Baal Shem Tov, so there were two classes of people who were not so down with this. One was the very scholarly, because they felt like they were losing their distinctive stature. The other was, and again, some, not all, of course, the other was the very simple, because you took away my perfect excuse. Till now, you don't expect me to do this. This is for rabbis, this is for scholars, this is for other people, not me. Yeah, you. That tells us that Hillel obligated the poor and Elazar ben Azariah obligated the wealthy. What does this mean? That nobody was poorer than Hillel. People may be familiar. He used to go and collect up sticks to sell for firewood for a few pennies. That was his job. So, but still, he'd study Torah. So all the poor people lost their excuse. They had a perfect excuse. I'd love to, but I'm too poor. And I have to spend all day. Well, no one was poorer than Hillel, and yet he studied Torah. There goes that excuse. Elazar ben Azariah was so wealthy that he was once arrested by his own employees because they didn't even know who he was. You know, does everyone in, well, maybe everyone who works for Microsoft knows who Bill Gates is. You know, you talk about these enormous corporations. Does every guy who works for Toyota know who would recognize the CEO of Toyota? No. So until then, all the rich people said, you know, I support Torah. You don't expect me to study Torah. I'm too busy running all my businesses. Well, no one was wealthier than Elazar ben Azariah, and still he studied Torah. So the same thing. We used to have a perfect excuse. You know, my parnas, you don't expect me. This is for other people. This is for holy people, special people, exalted people, not me. And the answer is, yeah, you too. So even if my parnasa requires me to sit out there with bums and foul and crass and misbehave and so on, no excuses. Sorry. Umikri Rasha Gomer ala sher ein pachal kima negadena. And he's still going to be titled a Rasha Gomer if he doesn't control himself. And the fact that he works on Michigan Avenue and he sees, you know, fur coats and diamond rings all day and night is not an excuse for being greedy, selfish, and arrogant, and so on. Even though that's what he works with all day. And again, other people, you know, we've probably all met someone like that. You know, it's very difficult. If their life circumstances constantly bringing them in contact with people who value material things, which is basically the whole world, it starts to rub off on the person. If they're not careful, they fall prey to it just as well. Well, that's not an excuse. We need to be careful. We need to be attentive to it. You should have restrained and dominated al ruach tavaso, the spirit of his taiva, shibalibo in his heart. And that's a crucial word, which we've seen before. The word ruach. Ruach literally means air, because all of those things are airy. Sure, Rabbi. That's what rabbis say. They say, you think those people aren't happy with their private jets and Rolls Royces? Well, they probably are. But besides for that, meaning, again, we all know that they're all useful tools. They're wonderful things to have, and so on. But again, they ultimately go away, just like BlackBerry and, you know, the Commodore 64 that everybody was running after, and the VCR. I can get you a good deal. And it was $1,000, you know, 40 years ago. And wow, look at that. And now you can't even find it. All things like that. We know, as we know. But so again, the Alter Rebbe has sort of jumped in here and said, right, that person has a challenge that I don't have. That person's challenge is more severe than my challenge. They have a pre-programmed spiritual Yetzer Hara. Why? We don't know. But for that person who's reading, oh, yeah, that's me. So it's not so bad if I do it or I have a perfect excuse. The Alter Rebbe was like, sorry, nice try, but no, you don't have an excuse. Because even if that is descriptive of who you are, you're still required to restrain yourself and contain yourself, as we say. Okay. Well, as we explained earlier, so here the Alter Rebbe counters what he said earlier with the phrase that the mind rules, or at least overrules, the heart by our nature. If that's our nature. Remember, the Alter Rebbe has addressed the issue that a person's reflexive response is the eye sees, the heart desires, the Yetzer Hara gets fired up. You know, we're very visual, and when we see things, you know, we see whatever it is, fancy cars and diamond rings or whatever it is, and it looks nice and it looks good. So my heart gets excited about it. I mean, it's all Madison Avenue advertising. It's all about the advertising, not about some sort of intellectual thing. It's all about the image thing. and the Yetzer Hara gets fired up. So you might say, so how can you ever expect me to win? It's the way I'm programmed. It's like a Pavlovian response. You dangle the temptation in front of my eyes. My eyes see it, my heart wants it, and I get crazy. So what's the counter? The counter is that my mind, which is higher than my eyes and higher than my heart, can still control myself. So there's no such thing as I couldn't help myself. To use an analogy, we've talked about this before, even though it's not so much the context here, but just to finish this idea, it's like someone who knows they have an allergy. So somebody knows they're allergic to peanuts, whatever it is. They still like the taste of peanuts. And when they see peanuts, they get excited about peanuts or, God forbid, addictions and so on. So it's very hard for them to be around all that behavior. And they see other people eating peanuts and enjoying them. So their eyes see it, their heart wants it. And then how are they? Because they know that if they eat peanuts, they're going to get sick. So the mind can overrule the heart. There's no such thing as, well, look, I couldn't help myself. I couldn't help myself. It was a reflexive response. I saw it, I felt it, I wanted it. Because the mind is strong. Okay. The Alter Rebbe says something here, I guess in a certain way it's comforting, which is he's acknowledging it's really hard. It's really a battle for a person to be able to battle against it. It really is a milchama. It's a war. And then when we use the analogy much earlier in Tanya from Shlomo HaMelech, from King Solomon, that taught that a person is like a small city. And you have two independent forces, two kings, who are battling it over control of all of the resources of this small city. They want all the people, they want all the natural resources. Similarly, our person is being battled over by two forces, the godly and the animalistic. And they both want total control of all of our thoughts, all of our spoken word, and all of our behaviors. They want absolute, total, and complete control over everything. And it's really a war. And the other guy is not your friend. Now, he says he is. He says, look, if you just do this for me, I won't bother you again, I promise. Just indulge this one thing and I'll leave you alone. But that's not the way it works. When a person indulges, they only get hungrier, not less, not less. If a person has one, the animal soul goes, I said, well, let's have another one. See, it's not so bad. But you said you wouldn't leave me alone. It's not so bad. You see, you had one. The world didn't end. You didn't get struck by lightning. It's not so bad. So he's lying. I mean, I know that sounds incredibly obvious, but that's really the point that the Alter Rebbe is saying. It's really difficult. It's a war. There is a statement that says that the time of davening, in particular, we're going to get into this, is the biggest battle. And again, hopefully not, but maybe we've all experienced it. We start davening, we start thinking about something else, we start getting irritated, we can't sit still, and so on and so forth. Why? Why is davening specifically so difficult? Because the premise of davening is the awareness of our dependence on something greater than ourselves. When we study Torah, the animal soul feels a certain satisfaction. Look, it's interesting. It's an interesting idea. It's conceptually, I can get my... Davening is predicated on a surrender of my own self and my own self-interest. And the animal soul gets really antsy with that. So he starts to battle against it. And that's why, again, it's not only our own personal life experience, it's the Gemara already recognizes this. And clearly the Alter Rebbe is saying, time of davening is a time of battle. It's really difficult. So, A, no excuses. B, look, would I do better than that person if I was in that spot? And even if I was in that spot, but I also had his Yetzer Hara, say, well, I do that and that doesn't bother me. Well, it doesn't bother me. That's my training and so on. And 3, yes, the Alter Rebbe is comforting us, I guess, by acknowledging that it's really hard. It is quite difficult. And what's the antidote? So as he said, he should have pachad Elokim. He said he should have the fear of God in front of his eyes. So again, as we said earlier, the eyes see and the heart gets all excited. So the Alter Rebbe said, what should he do? He should have the pachad of Elohim. If you look earlier, a couple of lines back to where we were, it says the fear of Elohim before his eyes. And that would have given him the capacity to dominate the spirit, that airiness, that ultimately non-substantive desire that's in his heart. Because of it, then the Alter Rebbe raises it one level. He says, Pachad Hashem. Now, again, I don't know if in the English it can capture it because we just translate both words as God. But in the Hebrew, the first time the Alter Rebbe says, Pachad Elohim, the fear of Elohim. Elohim is the God of this world, the God of nature, the God that we can see with our eyes. And the second one is the Pachad Hashem, is the infinite level, the four-letter tetragrammaton. Got to be able to say tetragrammaton if you want to be a rabbi, which is to be able to have this level of godliness that supersedes the physical world, the infinity. So Elohim is the God which created the world. So again, the formula is the eye see, the heart desires, the Yetzer Hara gets crazy. What's the antidote? The eyes should see the godliness before them. That is, if we will have that image of God before us, as David HaMelech writes, King David writes in Psalms, forever I see God before me. You know, the previous Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe in the 40s, came out with a campaign that everybody should learn some lines of Tanya and of Mishnah by heart. Why? Because the Frierdiker Rebbe said when you walk in the streets, you need to counter all of the distraction. Now, that's 1940. I don't think it's gotten a lot better in the last 80 years from all the things that are around. Other people, advertisements, Madison Avenue, all of that. So since the premise is that the eyes will see, the heart will feel, and then we'll get crazy, the counter to that is the eyes should be focused on, we should see the infinity of Hashem before us. First, let me rephrase that. First, we see the Elohim, the nature of God before us, and then we can get to the infinity of Hashem. So, Shvisi Hashem, the Negdi Summit, that's the God is forever before me. That's the preventative medicine to overcoming it. But it is really, really difficult. No question. It is really difficult. Lishbar hayetzer, to break down that Yetzer Hara. Haboyer ke'esh, that's like a burning fire. Lava, flame. Mimnei pachad Hashem, and that I should subdue that before the fear of Hashem. That's the Hashem. U'kamayna sayin mamash. It's like a test. It's like the test of Avraham Avinu. Now, here the Alter Rebbe is saying the pachad Hashem. Earlier we said first pachad Elohim, then again pachad Hashem, and here the Alter Rebbe says pachad Hashem. So it's important that we understand the difference. Elohim is the character of Hashem, or the quality of Hashem, whatever we call it, that created the world. Reishis bara, in the beginning of creation, created Elohim. That is the God that we can see within nature. So again, like my allergy analogy, I see the peanuts, they're delicious, but I know that peanuts will make me sick. This doesn't require a great spiritual awakening. It's a logical characteristic, a deduction that I can make, and I can comprehend that this, which looks so good, will make me sick. If I spend the $5 now, I won't have the $5 at the end of the week to make my budget. If I race through now, I could slip and fall. So again, this doesn't require a spiritual angle. It simply requires an awareness of the logic. But when it's a nisoyin mamish, when it's mamish a test, and we use that word very carefully. I believe I'm correct in saying the first time, or certainly one of the primary times that this term is used, which is the meaning to test or uplift. It's also the same word for a banner and a miracle, a nace, same word, is when Hashem asks Abraham to bring his son up for the slaughter. Hashem asks Abraham to slaughter Yitzchak. It says, Hashem, Elohim, Nisa tested Abraham. And the Alter Rebbe is equating it. If I say it, it's being a little melodramatic, but the Alter Rebbe is saying it right. He's saying the challenge that we have is mamish and asoyin. It is of that level. There's no logical reason why I should do that. You'll never get caught. Everybody does, all the excuses. And the Alter Rebbe says the only antidote to falling into that test of whatever the temptation is that's dangling before my eyes, the only antidote is Hashem. And again, when I say Hashem, I mean specifically the miraculous level of godliness. Because at the logical level, there's no reason why I shouldn't. Everybody does it. It's not so bad. Look around. We become very smart at coming up with all kinds of rationalizations and explanations and justifications. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe is telling us you have to view it like in the Soyin. You have to view it completely super rationally. A term that you may have heard before, shtus de kedusha, an irrational ridiculousness. When the soldier throws himself on a grenade, that's not rational. It's an irrational, holy irrational, not stupid, but irrational in a holy manner. And that mechanism will effectuate the withstanding of this test, which is Nisoyin Mamish. It is Mamish a test. Again, then that word test isn't even strong enough. The Alter Rebbe is equating it with the 10 tests with which Avram was tested. That's some serious stuff. Famine, son to the slaughter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the Alter Rebbe is acknowledging that it's very difficult, and the Alter Rebbe's antidote is have God before us all the time, so that we see the goal, we see the greater picture. And when it doesn't even work, have the infinity of Hashem, right? It doesn't make any sense. The infinity of Hashem. And in that manner, we have hope, or more than hope, we have a strategy for overcoming even the most severe of tests. Okay, we're going to, sort of circle back to how this is going to help us to open up our hearts in the service of Hashem and to feel this closeness, which is, again, what we're ultimately headed towards. But we'll discover that as the chapter unfolds. All right, everybody, have a good week, a good Tavach, and we'll see you next Tavach. I'll send out the recording. I'm sorry I missed the first couple of minutes, but I'll send it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.